Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CRB Customs, Values, and Practices, ensuring families receive culturally appropriate services. So if what I just said sounds strange to you, you're probably in the wrong room, and it's not too late to leave. But if you're in the right place, we're going to get started here in just a second. We have three people on the panel I'd like to introduce to you. First is Blanco Barocio from DHS in Marion County. Sure, Blanca, if you... There we go. Blanca is first-generation Mexican-American. She graduated from Portland State University with a degree in psychology. She has been in the social work field for approximately 10 years. She's a bilingual Spanish-speaking permanency worker and has previous experience with children and adults with developmental disabilities and mental health needs. Her primary role involves working with assisting monolingual Spanish-speaking families in overcoming their challenges and barriers to safely parent. And we also have Lene Garrett from CASA in Marion County. She has 15 years of experience working for CASA programs in 3 counties, began as a CASA in Jackson County in 1996, and has advocating for 15 children over a 12-year period while in Jackson County. And for the past 5 years, she's been the executive director for CASA in Lynn County, and we're lucky in Marion to have her. About 6 or 7 months now has it been? And Scott Lee, he's licensed to practice law in Oregon and California, which makes him a rare bird in some circles. Scott and I we practice at the same time together in Multnomah County, so I've known Scott for a long time and respect his work very much so, which is why he's here today. He practiced primarily dependency law in Multnomah County since 2001, representing both parents and children in dependency and termination cases, including 4 years at the Native American Program of Legal Aid Services. Scott volunteers with the National Alliance on Mental Illness and facilitates a family-to-family course, a 12-week educational course for family and caregivers of individuals living with mental illness. He is currently now the CASA supervisor in Multnomah County and on the CASA Racial Equity Task Force. So what we're going to do today, just to give you guys a quick overview, is we're going to hear a little bit from each panel member about how they approach culture when they're either, as Scott, representing parents or children, or from DHS perspective and how to provide those services, and then from a CASA perspective, how to supplement some of those services. So I think each person will have about 6 or 7 minutes to talk about their views on it. We have a quiz for you guys halfway through. Don't be scared. It's not pass-fail. It's just a quiz for fun. But through that quiz, I think we'll all come back afterwards and then have a discussion together and give you guys a chance to have an open forum and talk about some of the issues you may be experiencing in each of your respective counties. And I wanted to try and keep this a little bit lighthearted and fun, simply because talking about culture can be tough for us sometimes, particularly when you're in a highly technical administrative review process. It's not something that easily flows back and forth across the table. So keep that in mind. This is going to be an open space, open forum. Don't be bashful with your questions. I know these 3 folks will be able to handle anything you throw their way, so go ahead and knock yourselves out. But we'll start with Blanca, if you don't mind, and go ahead, take us away.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be able to participate in this session with you all here. How many of you have been to diversity training? Thank you. How many, what kinds of, I'm curious because many times people leave diversity trainings with not so much information. So I think what I want to really focus on is what DHS definition is of cultural competency. And it's really defined as a system or a process by which we assess differences of people. Culture, we look at culture, we look at language, class, race, ethnic backgrounds, disabilities, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and other diverse factors. And that's taken directly from DHS Child Welfare Policy. So having said that, it's a requirement for us to be able to have a good understanding of the people that come through our door. And it's based on all of those things, that we have to be able to do that. The other thing is really being self-aware and understanding your own personal biases or generalizations that we have picked up through our own experiences or based on information that we've gathered from social media or from other training. And so part of our role is, the majority of our role as DHS caseworkers is to really have a good understanding of the people that we work with so that we could understand what the family need is and work and build a real trusting relationship so that we could formulate a good case plan for the children that have been brought to our attention. And then, of course, offer services that are appropriate for each family. Some of the barriers that we run into include lack of staff availability. Unit where there's 4 permanency caseworkers that are assigned monolingual Spanish-speaking cases. So we work as a group and kind of network around some challenges or barriers that we face in working with these families. Let's see. So we really try to meet those needs up front. We engage families in doing the protective capacities assessment. Have you guys already had some training around the case planning? Okay. Okay. So when we get people through our door, we try to, first of all, get an understanding of who they are, where they come from, what their strengths are, what their deficits are. We identify the safety threats, and we try to build a general understanding of why we're involved in their life. Sometimes it takes time to be able to build a relationship with the families that we work with, because initially they're in crisis. They've just had their children removed from our care. Sometimes the person that they see up front is maybe English speaking only. They may encounter needing an interpreter, not feeling comfortable with the process like in anybody would feel uncomfortable. And so it really takes a lot of relationship building, and sometimes it takes up to several months to build a trusting relationship with your client so that you could start working effectively and productively with them. And so those are some of the challenges when working with monolingual Spanish-speaking families, is that it really requires a lot of work up front in building a trusting relationship.
When you call client, are you in the role of the caseworker that would present the case to us? Is that what you mean? Or have they got another caseworker that they're forming a relationship with? Traditional.
And Blanca, could you, sorry.
Do I?
Sorry. Could you repeat the question too so they capture it on the camera? Or, here, no, there you go.
When you speak of client, are you talking as the caseworker that is assigned to the parent and the child that would be presenting to the CRB board, or is that another relationship that the parent is going to have to make?
Usually what happens up front is in Marion County, there's a child protective service worker that only does the investigation piece, which is up to 30 days. So they don't really get to build a relationship. And then it goes on to a permanency worker. And that's the role that I would play is I pick up where the protective service worker left off and just say, okay, here we are. I understand these were the circumstances that brought you to the attention of child welfare, and this is what we need to work on so that your children could be safely returned to your care. And so we have to break it down a lot. Like, we can't use the terms, we're going to have a child safety meeting and we're going to talk about the safety threats, and, you know, we have to really break it down and say, oh, and just have a real heart-to-heart conversation with them. And sometimes it takes repetition. The other thing too is when we're at CRB meetings or court hearings, what I found to be my experience is that my clients the parents, I should say, are intimidated by the process, by the court, by DHS, by CRB. And so it takes a lot of prepping. So when we go to court, we need to say, okay, this is what the court hearing is about, and you have an opportunity to speak, and this is what you're going to hear. And then after the hearing, we also have to debrief them. Sometimes at CRBs, the panel will ask questions like, how have you mitigated the safety threats, or something to that effect. And then the parents are looking at me like, what do I say? And so it's really important to kind of keep it simple. And then we also have the interpreter who is translating simultaneously. And sometimes the parent is not able to connect with who's asking what question. And so it's too fast sometimes. And so that can cause some challenges as well.
Thank you, Blanca. Let's turn it over to, unless there was something else you wanted to finish with right there, Blanca.
No,
Okay.
there's just so much that I could say, and I was trying to wrap it up in a nutshell, and it was pretty challenging.
We'll come back to everybody, too, after our quiz. Lene, do you want to jump in here now and give us the CASA perspective?
Okay, so I normally stand when I present, and so I feel like I'm sort of bound up right here. And to say that it's a little nerve-wracking sitting down when you talk to a group like this.
Lene, if you want this microphone, you can stand if you'd rather.
Oh, no, but now I have to look at my notes. I totally got prepared for this position. You know, I have been with CASA programs for a long time, and this is, social services was never my thing. I had another career, and it was around corporate business. And so I have learned a tremendous amount about culture. And my perspective, and again, this is me, my perspective on culture, having done social services work through being a CASA and directing and training many, many CASAs, is very, very broad. And it's come to encompass sort of looking at families as an individual unit and what's within their cultural norms. What does their individual culture look like? And so for just a moment, I'd like each of you to stop and think about your own family of origin. And that could be whoever you consider or whatever you consider to be your family unit. And that's, for me, where I hope that our CASA volunteers start when they begin to look at the culture and dynamics of a particular family. Components of that could include ethnicity. It could include language barriers for a number of reasons. I think if we think broadly about language, that gives us a really good idea. It's not only just a different language because of speaking Spanish or Russian. It could also be that they come from severe poverty and their language ability could be very different from some others, particularly those in the courtroom. If we look at the culture of the way child rearing happens, if we look at socioeconomic level, some of those other things that really the components that bring us all together culturally. And I wrote a little something earlier that reminds me of how complex the whole is of culture, and it's knowledge, its beliefs, its art, its morals, law, customs, any other capabilities or habits that are acquired by a person or a member of society. As I mentioned, it could be socioeconomic level. It's really a very broad thing when you look at it as a whole. I have a really quick example. I went to a Little League thing for my grandson. It's his first time at T-ball today. And it's a 4-generation thing in our family. It's really important. It's a big deal. And he was so excited for his grandpa and I to see him play today. And I was thinking about that on my way here. And for us, that's a cultural norm. It's also a tradition. It's also somewhat of a ritual. And all those things, again, encompass, I think, the work that involves families. So having said that, I was asked to talk about a couple of things specifically, and it's what can CASAs do to find supports when maybe child welfare or DHS has been unsuccessful. And to get some of these answers, I actually put an email out to several of my CASA counterparts throughout the state and asked for their stories because I can quickly get caught up in my own. And one of the stories that was shared was about a Somali family, a refugee whose family was Muslim. And I think that I don't always know how to compare what DHS can do versus what CASAs can do because I only know what CASAs can do, and it's amazing. So apparently the foster family was not of the same faith as this particular youth. So the CASA worked to hook the youth up with a professor from a local college who could provide background information about the faith, the Muslim faith. And then the CASA did extensive research from and drew on her experience of living in Africa. And that helped her formulate some cultural activities that could relate to this youth's culture. And her ability to help this youth connect with people within her own culture was really helpful in her maintaining that self, that sense of self and that identity that is so valuable in your teen years. I mean, we know how important it is for us to have our, I'm going to use the word culture again, intact, particularly for kids, because it helps to build self-esteem and strengthen their place in their world. Another example that was given to me in regards to supports that maybe child welfare wasn't able to bring in was kids that are sometimes that are on that autism spectrum because they need special supports, they learn differently, they communicate differently. And so CASAs have been known to download copies of just autism support materials and books and provided them to not only caseworkers, but to the foster parents to help them understand if they had never had children in their home with that particular disability. And so I think that CASAs have the gift of time, as one of my favorite CASA coordinators says, and they have that ability to look farther and deeper to bring in cultural supports, whether that is because there's a language barrier for whatever reason, whether it's a youth who has a religious belief that needs to be honored to help them maintain their the consistency in their life as they move maybe from home to home. There was a couple of other stories that were given to me that I thought were pretty good. A Native American family who was very unfamiliar with the IEP process, the Individualized Education Plan, that can happen at the school level, and they asked the CASA, would you please come with us? We don't understand what the school's asking us to do with our child. And the child had been transitioned back home, and so the CASA was instrumental in being able to show up and help navigate communication between the school system and then the child's family so that the child could move forward in their educational learning process. CASAs are trained to look at the broad spectrum, I think, of culture. And one of the things that we ask them in the trainings that I've been part of in 3 counties now is to really look outside your own box and your own framework. And that ability to expand your lens, I think, can be really helpful. I know of a CASA who had advocated for a teen all the way through her aging out, and when she moved out independently, the CASA would go visit her at her home because she also had a young child at that time, and the house would be a complete wreck. And what the CASA had to realize was the ability to look for safety concerns and not so much the cleanliness of the house. And the way she came to understand that was saying to this 19-year-old mom, the place is a wreck. There's stuff everywhere, there's clutter, it looks disorganized. Tell me about that. And the girl said, I've been in foster care since I was 7, and this is the way my mom had our house. But my mom was dirty. I'm not dirty, but if I have clutter around, I feel safer. And so the ability to put aside the CASA's own cleanliness or neat, organized home really helped her be able to be available to support this young girl in moving forward. And sometimes it's a judgment piece, and it's not necessarily anything that has to do with a safety risk or anything else. And so we have to be able to, I think, as people, particularly when we're working with other folks who are working so hard to make changes in their life that allow their children to remain with them, I think we have the responsibility to look outside of ourselves and our framework and step into someone else's framework and see where we really can be helpful and supportive. So I could go on and on forever, which I'm not going to do. So Rakeem, do I see the high sign? Thank you.
Good morning. So I always like to tell stories, and has any fans of The Wire here, HBO series? Okay. For those of you, write this down, The Wire. This is going to be the best recommendation. It's great drama, and watch it with subtitles. So most of you don't know it, but there's, so it's like a Dangerous Minds movie scenario, inner city, young, inexperienced, a white teacher. So if you're in The Wire, season 4, episode 2. Prez is completely overwhelmed by these students. They're running roughshod all over him. And he's in a teacher meeting, and there is a little African-American woman who gets the utmost respect from the big football players because she just has that presence about her. And this young teacher is just dying for advice from her. And at the end of the scene, she comes up to him, pats him on the shoulder, and says, "You've just got to have soft eyes." I've always loved that scene, and it sounds kind of woo-woo, especially coming from an attorney, but that's what I advise my CASAs to do. The more trainings I do, the more I realize that the clients, the parents that I used to represent, had zero concept of what was going on. You are advising them, they barely know me, and they hear termination of parental rights. It's like cancer, blah, 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 so they have no concept of what's going on. We have, I think, more hesitancy to talk about race and cultural competency than we do about sex abuse. I think that we're more comfortable talking about that than race. So I appreciate you all being willing to have this courageous conversation with us. The other incident that comes up to my mind recently was I had an emergency, and I was dealing with a 22-year-old woman who had been beaten up, held at gunpoint by her baby's daddy, and he had recently cut off his electronic monitoring bracelet, and so was on abscond status. And I was helping this young woman with her restraining order hearing, domestic relations case, and landlord-tenant issue, and another attorney came into my office and said, "My client would like to relinquish her parental rights today, does not want to do it in the district attorney's office. Would you mind witnessing?" I said, "Fine, I'll do it. I understand that it's difficult to do, but I'm going to multitask because I can witness you do something and multitask." Fortunately, my boss stopped me and told me to be present. And I'm glad I did, because this was probably one of the worst days of her life. And I deserved it. She deserved it. And so I'm glad I did. Kind of like my long way of saying it's better to be kind than to be right. And this is coming from a guy that likes to be right. I like black letter law. I like knowing what the statute says. But if we can make this process a little bit easier for people, I think they deserve it. You know your communities much more than I do regarding cultural services, but I agree, we need to step out of ourselves. We need to understand our own implicit bias. If you haven't studied or read about implicit bias, I think it's incredibly important. We live in not a post-racial state or nation simply because we have an African-American president. Walter Scott shot in the back. You know, things are happening in this, and I think that are going to continue to come to kind of a boil as we eventually get to a more we're going to reach a state where we are going to be more in the minorities or the majorities, and it's going to be rough getting there. But there is an overrepresentation of minorities in the dependency and criminal system. Personal quote that I enjoy is if you're not outraged, you're not paying enough attention. There is a lot that is wrong in the system. Assuming that an attorney can make the most culturally appropriate services, recommendations for his client, assumes also that he's minimally adequate, he or her. And quite frankly, our caseloads are too high. We underfund the public defense services. And so there does need to be systems change. The next time you are asked to vote on something, think about how it affects the poorest among us, because there's a crunch coming.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Let's take a quick break. There's a quiz on your table. One of you has the answer key. So if you do, just raise your hand so I can trade you out, because we accidentally gave that one out. Nice try. There we go. Thanks. So take 5 minutes to do this quiz. This is the original Australian test of intelligence. So, and I'll bring some up there for the panel so you guys can take the quiz with us too. Take about 5 minutes to do this quiz, and then we're going to have a discussion about it afterwards. Remember, it's not pass-fail. It is graded on a curve, though. No cheating either. If I see eyes wandering onto other people's papers, I'm snatching it up and I'm going to rip it up like they did in grade school. Amy can't take the quiz because she's taken it already, so she knows all the answers. So Nancy, no talking between. Okay, just checking. Okay, you guys got about one more minute or so. Okay, if you're not finished, it's okay. You weren't going to get it right anyway. So this quiz is based on the Kuuk-Thaayorre culture, which is in northeastern Australia. Okay, so if you were from that culture, you would have gotten 10 out of 10 right on this, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. If you're from somewhere else and have no familiarity with this culture, it might be a little bit different. So do you guys want to hear the answers? I'm assuming you do. Okay. Number one, and keep tally of your score, because there's a pat on the back for the person with the most right answers. The correct answer for number one is many. The word Hmong is best translated as many, since it can mean any number between 4 and 9 or 10. Their culture has 1, 2, and 3, and then they have many. There's nothing after 3. It's 1, 2, 3, and then many. So if you knew that one, you would also know the answer to number 2. Many. The answer to number 2 would be many. All right, number 3. Number 3. The right answer is tree. Anyone get that one right? No? I'll let you guys study a little bit next time. This stems from the Kuuk-Thaayorre speaker's early experience with tobacco, which was stick tobacco. Hence, it is classified with tree. Number 4. Is this the multiple choice question? Is this one of them? Okay, so somebody might get lucky on this one. Number 4. Crocodiles, turtles, birds, and frill-necked lizards are all classified as men, which broadly might be translated as animals. Snakes, along with eels, are classified as yak, which may be broadly translated as snake-like creatures. Anyone get that one right? Anyone that it can't be classified as a snake? You got that one right? All right, good work. Number 5. Even the answers are still hard for me to get through. I've taken this quiz 3 times, and I've got a grand total of 2 questions right. Number 5. All the items are classified with sugar as belong to the class of objects known as mei. Broadly translated, mei means vegetable food. Even witchetty grubs that are found in the roots of trees fall under this rubric. So does honey, which is also associated with trees and hence fruit. The Kuuk-Thaayorre language had no problem fitting flour into the mei category, since it obviously resembled some of their own processed vegetable foods. The word mei can also mean sweet and hence sugar, which of course does not resemble anything in their traditional culinary practices. All right. You got that one right? Kinda? Oh, you got all 3? That's good work. Number 6. Anybody want to venture a guess out loud for everyone? No? Okay. Correct answer for number 6 is eat. Eat is the right word. We make a distinction between eating and drinking, but they do not. That's not part of their language. They don't make a distinction. If you put something in your mouth, you're eating it, whether it's liquid or solid. That's what I used to tell my 2-year-old at home, but that's another story. Number 7. Okay, this one's complicated, so I'm going to walk you guys through this one. And these clues are easy for someone from the culture. An avoidance taboo operates between mother's brother and sister's son, and politeness requires that sister's son should never directly face mother's brother, nor talk to him directly in company. Sam and Ben are obviously brothers because of their unrestrained interaction, while Harry, with his back turned to both his uncles, is obviously the respectful nephew. You got that one right? Oh, all right. That's what standardized testing is all about, right? Okay, number 8. Number 8. Now, there might be a few of you guys that get this one right. Among the Kuuk-Thaayorre, God has been equated with a mythological character, and he is definitely non-malevolent. Both fate and germs are concepts foreign to the Kuuk-Thaayorre belief system. No one dies without reason, and suicide is unknown to them, so the right answer is someone, which is the case in this sorcery-riddled society. People get that one right? A few people got that one? Okay. Number 9. The small female wallaby is the correct answer. Emu is a food that may be consumed only by very old people. Kangaroos, especially large ones, may not be eaten by parents or their children. The children will get sick otherwise. Everyone knows that, though, right? And the last one is The question is why, what's the question again, Stephen? Why should you be careful of your cousins? Because some of them have to be avoided like the plague. For example, a male must avoid his father's sister's daughter or anyone classified with her. Such relations are called poison cousins in Aboriginal English. Okay, so tally up your answers. Anyone get more than 2? Correct? 2? More than 3? Got someone with 3? Okay. How about the panel? Let's see how the panel did. Let's see how the experts did. Did you guys get more than 3 total? Lene, you got 2? Blanca, Scott? Yeah. I didn't want to share my answers with anyone either after I took it. So the purpose of that quiz is to recognize that we don't always know much about some other cultures, and that's natural. It'd be hard to know about every culture that exists in the world because there's so many of them. But there are some underlying themes in every culture that you can talk about when you're in a review because you know it's important to your own culture. So while you don't have to reach across the aisle and understand what someone's experiencing, there are things that you've experienced that you know are important to you. Food, family, music, art, how you spend time with friends, church. All these things are important to families, and that doesn't go away just because a family has entered the child welfare system. So what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so is to just open up the room for discussion, questions for the panel if you have them, and if not, I have a couple scenarios that I'd like to present to the panel, and then we can have a discussion from there. But does anyone have a question or something that they thought of while they were listening to our panel members speak that they'd like to ask at this time? Okay. Let me bring the microphone to you, Nancy.
The CRB process is really pretty formalized, and you were talking about this. How would you greet parents with soft eyes to make them welcome and try to open the door at least a little bit?
Hello? I think soft eyes is, for me, just kind of like an attitude and an intent, you know. It is a very intimidating process, confusing, and anything that you can do to try to help them understand. So that's time explaining the process to your client from the attorney's perspective. But oftentimes we're thinking about the next case that we need to do. We have limited contact with our clients, either because they're not calling us back or because they are in relapse or they have other issues going on. But we can try to help educate and to make the process kinder, to focus, to be understanding. Tie goes to the runner. You know, if a parent has to work, oftentimes we don't think about they're on public trans, or they sometimes have to come to hearings that are set over, and their employer is not going to like that, and they might lose their job. And so if we can excuse them from a hearing, perhaps, but to just take that into consideration, to realize that if we think that court hearings and CRB hearings are intimidating and confusing, for someone who does not have this understanding, it is really intimidating. So just to, I think, recognize that is I think, the first step.
Thank you, Scott. Question? Nora?
So are you comfortable if you feel like the board is going too fast or using a word, and I'm talking about all 3 of you, and except would you take on the role of attorney, and just saying, give me a minute to rephrase it, or even somewhere when we're introducing whether it's finding number 1, was it appropriate, or are there any of them, and you feel like the parents aren't quite following. Do you feel comfortable interrupting and saying to the board, slow down, or it would be helpful if you slow down? I mean, you don't have to stand or anything.
I feel comfortable. When there is a translator present, obviously give time for the translator to translate. In some cultures, they will simply nod. Many, and even in our culture, in dominant American culture, no one wants to look stupid and will just, yeah, I'm fine, yeah. And but sometimes to get them to repeat what you are advising them of. The acronyms are horrible. Everyone knows that. That's confusing for everyone. So paying attention, I guess, to make sure that they are following things, though it's oftentimes difficult to have them, they have to have the opportunity to reflect. Oftentimes, though, aren't they the last people we ask? Do you have anything to add? They're always at the end. But also, as an attorney, I am going to poke them and to shut them up because many times they are going to say things that are not helpful for their case. And so I will want to either speak for them or, and that's also can be, that there's a hierarchy there too, right? You know, like, no, I know better than you. Let me speak on your behalf.
Blanca or Lene, anything you want to add to that particular question, or should we take another one?
I think you could take another one from my perspective. Mhm.
Anyone else have another question? Okay.
This would be specifically for DHS, and what process do you guys use in determining when a call comes in whether it really is something that needs to be looked at or whether there is just a cultural issue as to what we perceive as a protective service case versus not?
In Marion County, we have 3 screeners that are Spanish speaking, and so I think it's case by case. But generally, if it's a Spanish speaking anonymous reporter, we try to gather as much information up front about the family dynamics to really assess how to respond to that call, if it's a health and safety issue or if it's a cultural issue. Sometimes cultural issues can be health and safety issues, so that's why that assessment process takes place, where a protective service worker is assigned to the case, and then they go out and do an assessment and then break down the information based on their interactions with the family, the environment, and interview with the children.
Thank you. More questions? Nora?
Sorry. One of my nightmares, thank God it's not one thing that has come up yet, but we're not discussing biracial. And when looking for relative placements, and you may not be able to answer it, but to me it's especially important for me to know that we're not going to send a child to a relative placement who is taking the child under the wrong circumstances. They don't want anyone else to have him or her, but they really have a problem with either mom or dad who's a person of color. Am I making sense? Is there anything in the screening process or the ICWA process or any of that? And I know, I hope we're talking people in their 50s and older that still may have those feelings, but it's possible.
My hope is that any relative that comes through the front door has an opportunity to be a placement resource. That's one. And then 2, I don't know how to say this respectfully, but I sometimes think that family drama doesn't always necessarily have to do with race or ethnicity or cultural background. It has to do with personal differences, because we're human, we're imperfect, and that sort of thing. So I think as the certification process occurs, sometimes some of that stuff is kind of weeded out, and or if there was a scenario where it appeared that there could be some sort of discrimination based on race occurring, that there'll be a conversation about that with the whole family in a family decision meeting. We'd use the process to kind of work through those things and really focus on what's in the best interest of the child and not what the family wants or what they're fighting about.
Let me bring you the microphone.
Well, I just wanted to say that sometimes based on the color of a biracial child, you will make an assumption that this child belongs with one group of the family or the other. And I've seen many times where a child was really pretty dark, and people would make the assumption this is the African-American child. Yet when you meet the family that this child lives with, they have never lived with anybody that was African-American. Their grandma and all of the relatives and the culture that they've lived with. So making assumptions on any of those things are something that we need to be careful not to do that.
We are notoriously horrible at being able to pick and choose or to determine what race or culture someone is by the color of their skin. It's really important to ask the family themselves, how do you ethnically and culturally identify yourselves? Tell us. Oftentimes, CASAs get the reports from the DHS about what race or ethnicity the family is. Might be wrong.
I recently had a conversation with a young man who had aged out of the foster system, and when he became part of the foster system, he was in his teens, and he learned that he had Native American heritage. And of course, it was identified as an ICWA case, and there was lots of effort and pressure put on him to come to know his tribe and to engage in tribal traditions and rituals, and he really did not want to do that. And he had been raised in a family not practicing or observing any of that, and actually was quite a surprise to the family that there was enough Native American heritage to identify him. Anyway, he said to me, I wish that they hadn't put so much pressure on me to be someone that I wasn't, and to embrace something that I didn't really care about. And so it goes back to best interest, and really to what was being said, is that what you read and what you see may not be what is really part of the family dynamic or culture. So anyway, that was very important for me to hear, because there was an assumption made for him, and we always have to look at that.
Which is why it's so important to have the kids there at the reviews instead of absent, because that's the only way for us to find out that that's true.
Other questions? Okay, I want to present a scenario for everyone in the room, and hopefully the panel members can sort of lead us through this discussion. And I'm taking this actually from a Marion County case that we had pretty recently. So we had a 14-year-old girl enter foster care after being physically disciplined by her mother. Okay, this was a family from, the parents were born in Mexico. The daughter was born in Mexico, but she came to the United States at an early age, 3 or 4. So after the child was removed, the parents immediately engaged in services. They participated. Child was put into non-relative foster care, and she says she does not want to return home. The parents are ready for her to return home, but they don't think that they ever did anything wrong. They completed the services and passed everything, but they have not acknowledged that the physical discipline was that big of an issue. And I know from my experience that there's probably a lot of folks that have seen that in their counties across the state, but can anyone on the panel sort of walk us through how board members maybe should handle that scenario when you've got parents participating in services, a child that does not want to go home, largely, it appears, because she's not aligning herself with the culture inside the home and has sort of reached out to the American culture, so to speak, and feels much more comfortable in that setting. I know that's kind of a long, convoluted explanation, but can you help us unpack that a little bit?
I think as a DHS caseworker, I think I would want to have a better understanding of who the family is. What has been the parents' experience? What was their upbringing like? And just kind of get an understanding of where their view and perspective is, what their views and perspective is based on parenting practices and disciplining. Because it is common in I could speak about the Mexican culture, that it's okay to spank your children and physically discipline, and there's no legal or safety repercussions as a result of their choice to parent that way. That would be so that's one thing. So I think in this particular family that maybe that's why they're not seeing it as an issue, because that's what they've known, that's what they grew up in, that's part of their culture, that's part of upbringing. And then, so then the other side of the coin to that is that we're in the United States of America, where we teach proactive parenting, we teach praising, and we teach different methods, alternative methods that are more appropriate and safe methods of parenting that could result in maybe children growing up with the same type of success, but just a different method of getting there. I think it's kind of a loaded question.
It is.
But I would break it down to those things. Sometimes with the families that I've worked with, we say, okay, now we want you to take this parenting class, and we want you to do this, and and part of the parenting class is for you to demonstrate change in your behavior so that we could know that you have the skills to safely parent your child. Those kind of things are just like from another planet. It's like, what do I do? Where do I start? So fortunately in Marion County, we do have bicultural therapists and things like that, so that they could compare, maybe this is how we used to do things back in the day when we were growing up in Mexico, but this is a new way of parenting, and this is where we need to be at. And so to kind of get parents to be open-minded and just get to that point to be open to new ideas is really, really important if we want parents to acknowledge, okay, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, but this is what I've learned in place of that, and so I'm very grateful for that. That takes a while. Sometimes at the 6-month mark, they're not there yet.
Thank you. And any suggestions on how board members maybe should handle a scenario like that, or what types of questions they should be trying to ask of parties involved?
So to unpack that a little bit, I would ask for a culturally appropriate therapist for the child to try to unpack why they did not want to go home. And perhaps a culturally appropriate family therapist, separate from the child's therapist, to work on rebuilding that family relationship. Obviously, we would prefer to have the parent internalize their understanding, but we can't always get there. And does the safety level rise? If they promise never to do it again, is that not sufficient? There's a continuum. I am reminded of a case, Hispanic father, the stepchild, not his child, but the stepchild was transgendered. And my pitch to the court was, my father would not have accepted me if I came out transgendered, and yet you expect this parent to go through these services. can we truly expect that? And so what's the safety level? What's the threat of harm to the child? Can we work to make the family? I don't believe that foster care is always the solution. Sometimes it is, but there is damage to children who are separated from their siblings and family members. So it's a balancing test.
Thank you, guys. And we're at 12:29. We got time for one more question if anyone has one. Otherwise, I think it's time to break for lunch. Big thank you to Scott and Blanca and Lene. Thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate it. You can take the bookmarks on the table if you guys want them. If you're ashamed of your quiz results, recycle them on the way out. And then we're going to head over to lunch. So thank you guys.
Presentation, but then I was like, oh my gosh, my mind just went everywhere.